Greetings, and welcome to our meditation and short talk that I'll give. As an introduction to meditation and the topic for today, I think it's well known that people often have selective attention, that we pay attention to mostly to the things that either we're very interested in or the things we're very worried about or aversive to. And that when there's a lot of afflictive or difficult states of mind present, they can really affect how we see the world. If there's a lot of fear, there can be picking up what is threatening, or imagine what's threatening. If there's a lot of hostility or hatred or aversion, it's easy to pick up the things that are wrong and tune into that. And if there's a lot of greed or lust or passion, desire, we can orient ourselves very much to the objects of what we want. And so that the attention becomes selective. If we become inwardly calm, then we gaze upon the world in a calm way, and we're more likely to notice that the world is calmer than if we see it through other feelings. If we're inwardly peaceful, we perceive the world through peaceful eyes. And it isn't so much that we pick up selectively peace, but remarkably we discover there's much more peace than we realized in the world. Not to deny the conflicts that exist, the challenges, but it gives it a very different context. If we gaze upon the world with inner freedom, we see there's actually much more freedom in the world. And if we look at the world, and if we feel an inner peace, inner beauty, then we look through with eyes, with a gaze that's beautiful. We see the world in more beautiful ways. That how we experience the world is influenced by how we experience things internally. And for the theme of this week, a refuge, if we find a refuge within, then we'll look at the world through the eyes of refuge, and we'll see there's much more refuge in the world than we realized. Much more goodness. So, to sit in a meditation posture, that if you do this regularly and becomes familiar, this posture of meditation, then it becomes a refuge. It becomes a place of support. It becomes a kind of a homecoming because it's so familiar and so associated with an intimacy and a closeness and a connectedness and a calm peacefulness that is meaningful and appreciated and helpful. So taking the meditation posture and perhaps adjusting the posture so that it is more of a refuge, and a refuge for attention, for awareness. And perhaps paying a little attention to the spine, and from the base of your spine to your bottom of your skull, follow up your vertebrae, slowly up, and make small adjustments so that whatever way you can feel that the vertebrae are a little bit more balanced on each other, that the weight of the body is not forward or behind the spine, but somehow balanced. And as you come up between the shoulder blades, to ever so gently pull the spine in a little bit there, so the chest comes a little bit open. Maybe the shoulders come back a little bit. And perhaps there's a little feeling of alertness between the shoulder blades. And then up all the way to through the neck. And then perhaps freeing up some space between the last vertebrae and the skull by tipping the head, not forward, but so the crown of the head goes up towards the ceiling a little bit. And the chin comes down and maybe a little bit back. And then as you exhale, to exhale, yielding to gravity, the ways in which we hold ourselves tense. See if you can relax as you exhale. I think of this upright spine, kind of like a pole that stands strong and straight, so that everything else can hang from it. Shoulders can hang. The belly can hang. Even the chest can release and be held up hanging, relaxing, letting go as you exhale. And with some degree of kindness, of kind regard, turn your attention to your mind and notice what's happening in your mind without being alarmed or concerned or without needing to justify anything, or just notice the mind, what you're thinking, how you're thinking. Maybe you notice tension, agitation. Sometimes people who don't notice their mind much will discover that it's weary. There's a weariness sometimes of incessant thinking and concerning. And perhaps you can relax the tension of the mind, the pressures in the head, any tightness there might be in the forehead or eyes or jaws, or in the brain area itself. Perhaps you can, if you think in words, see if you can think quieter, with a quieter voice. If you think in images, perhaps you can slow the images down. One of the advantages of slowing the thinking down, making it quieter, is we might notice that there is an awareness, a mindfulness of thinking that's larger or more prominent than the thinking itself. a kind of silent awareness that knows, perceives. And then to let go into your breathing. And wherever it is in your body you feel most comfortable experiencing breathing, see if you can let go into that part of your body. Allowing that silent perception, mindfulness, to receive, to hold, to be with the experience of breathing. whatever way you might feel calm, you might gaze upon your breathing, your experiences of the moment in a calm way, noticing where there's calm in your body and your mind, even if there is agitation. See if you can gaze upon it all calmly. And you might see if there's some degree somewhere within, some hint of peacefulness in the body or the mind. Something which feels like a peaceful place within. Is it possible to then gaze upon all things with an awareness, a mindfulness which has some quality of peacefulness in it? Being peaceful in being aware. And with whatever degree of peaceful gazing you have, as you gaze peacefully, might there be more peace within than you had noticed? Perhaps there are parts of your body that are relatively peaceful in a way that feels good. Gazing upon breathing peacefully. Is there anything about the breathing that is a little bit more peaceful than you realized? A little bit more easeful? Is there anything within that feels as if it's free? Free of clinging or resistance? Free of needing or pushing away? Some place of freedom, even if it's a small corner somewhere in your body or your mind. Calm, peaceful, free. And if so, guided by that feeling of freedom, can you gaze upon all things so that the gazing, the seeing, the perceiving also has some quality of freedom? And then is there any place in your personal experience, anything at all, body, mind, your personal experience, that might seem beautiful, that might have a goodness in it, or seem precious or valuable? And to sit with, breathe with what's beautiful within, even if it's just a hint or intuition. And then with that sense of beauty, can you gaze upon all things with some quality of, in a beautiful way also? Some feeling of goodness or something, some way of gazing that seems valuable. Beautiful, beautiful gaze upon all things. And as we come to the end of this sitting, to whatever degree you can, have your perception, especially your eyes as they gaze. See if you can keep the gaze calm, peaceful, maybe a sense of freedom in the looking. Perhaps looking in a way that has some quality of inner beauty or goodness. And when I ring the bell to end this sitting, when you're ready, open your eyes and look around the place where you're meditating. With those eyes, with that gaze, look upon your environment with a calm gaze or a peaceful gaze or a free gaze. Just in a relaxed way, look around, gaze around, and see what it's like to gaze with a peaceful gaze. So the topic for today is, as a third talk in this Refuge series, is refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the external refuge. Yesterday I talked about the internal refuge, finding the Buddha, Dharma, the Sangha, what those qualities represent, and qualities within ourselves. And but also, more classically in Buddhism, the conventional idea of refuge is in the Buddha himself, historical Buddha, in the Dharma, which has a variety of meanings, what that is, but one meaning is the teachings and practices of the Buddha. And Sangha refers sometimes to the monastic community, sometimes refers more essentially to those people, monastic and lay, who have experienced some degree of awakening, some degree of becoming freer, some inner maturity, spiritual maturity. And here in the West, we tend to expand the meaning of Sangha, sometimes to be everyone that we practice with. And occasionally people in the West talk about all beings are a Sangha, which I think is a beautiful idea. And sometimes the external Sangha, external refuge, is one that is very strongly connected to two things. It can be very strongly connected to people's deep inner faith, a deep sense of inspiration, of trust, of confidence. It could also be related to start seeing in the world, beyond oneself, examples of what makes the world and the living in the world meaningful, or gives it a sense of purpose, or gives it a kind of orientation, so we know what we're doing, where we're going. And so I'll say more about that, but Important part of this refuge is action. Buddha said our actions are our refuge, but to have a sense of what this life is about, what we can act on or do or choose, that leads to greater freedom and alleviation of suffering for ourselves and for others. So the external refuge. I imagine that if I met the Buddha, and I was walking, somehow he was alive today, that maybe I wouldn't use the word refuge because it's kind of a Buddhist word, especially before I became a Buddhist. I would have used words like if I met this person and saw this, could feel what this person was about and heard those teachings, that it would have inspired a tremendous inspiration in me, a tremendous sense of recognition of here was something really valuable and good. Here was a goodness or an example of a possibility of how to live, which is a worthwhile thing to pursue. That this is a person who represents how I would like to be, or how I would like to move towards and become like this. And I might say that I had a lot of trust in this person, I had a lot of faith in this person, I was inspired by this person. I might also say that I saw that person as an example of what I could become. And in that there would be kind of a heartfeltness or a joy in seeing this possibility in someone else. And so in the ancient world, people use the language of sarana, refuge, for all those feelings that might happen when they encounter the Buddha. And the most common description in the ancient suttas for people who met the Buddha and then heard his teachings and then decided to go for refuge was this statement here. Magnificent, magnificent Master Gautama, the Buddha, the Dhamma has been made clear in many ways by Master Gautama, as though he were turning upright what has been turned upside down, setting straight, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. We go for refuge in Master Gautama and to the Dhamma and to the monastic community. Let Master Gautama remember us as lay followers from today, having gone for refuge for life. So it's a little bit of it's repeated over and over again in the sutta, so it's a little bit of a formulaic. Someone kind of came up with this, but it's kind of inspiring, this idea that how the totality of it and the meaning, the impact it's had. In ancient India at the time of the Buddha, people were already going for refuge, not in the Buddha, but before him. The ancient texts do talk about a triple refuge. And the triple refuge back then were three of the Brahmanical or Indic gods of the time, Indra, Prajapati, and the god of death. And somehow this idea of refuge triple refuge was already there in India. So people are already predisposed, and so that's when they came to the Buddha that, this is something that they were, were kind of, the culture set up that this is what they do. And we have no examples anywhere that the Buddha instructed people to go for refuge in the Buddha Dharma and the Sangha. People did it in his presence, and he assented in silence. And that's a kind of how to read that silence and what his relationship to all this is a little bit, interpretive, I suppose. But what we do find the Buddha emphasizing, as I've been saying these days, is the internal refuge, finding refuge in oneself and in the practice we do, in the practice of mindfulness, seeing that as a refuge. But he did, in his silent ascent, allow people to go for refuge, and so I guess he approved of it. But I think that for many of us, this idea of one of the ways that refuge works for many people is that something inside of us is moved by these external refuge. Something inside recognizes the truth of it, or recognizes ourself in that. That somehow what the Buddha is, what the Dharma really is, what the Sangha is, the example of people who have practiced deeply, somehow resonates, moves, touches those things in ourselves. Sometimes we only see in the we sometimes first see in the external world a possibility for a different way of living. See it in the example of other people, or in teachings we read that really inspire us, and then we find it in ourselves. The first Buddhist book that I read was Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by the Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki. And it was a remarkable experience to read this book, because as I was reading it, I felt I was reading things that I knew, but didn't know that I knew. There was like this deep recognition. Oh, yes, I know this. I know this. It somehow touched some parts of me. And it was, that book then set me on the course of doing Buddhist practice. I find it inspiring to look at the statues of the Buddha, because for me the statues, the ones that are well done, represents the filling out of a possibility that I've recognized in small ways within myself. A possibility of being free, of being peaceful, of being wise, of being compassionate. And I know that I could grow in these capacities. And to me it's very meaningful to have met people and have the example of the Buddha, but I met people in my life who clearly have inspired me, that they seem to have filled out this potential in a big way, an important way. And really seeing examples of this has been, I don't think I could have practiced as much as I did without seeing them, in a certain way trusting and having faith, or without using the word refuge, having refuge in these people who showed me what's possible. Something inside of me resonated with that, touched something, or it pointed to something inside of me that it was my turn to open and grow and develop. And so it isn't so much that we go for refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha in some kind of blind allegiance, or some kind of magical thinking that if I just kind of turn myself over to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha and just trust them kind of completely, somehow I'll be taken care of. It's more like we recognize how valuable and how inspiring the Buddha, the example of the Buddha is, how inspiring the Dharma, the teachings are, and the Sangha, the other people we practice with, the other people who are maturing more than us and growing and freer than us, that this is like, again, a mirror for ourselves. This is really right. And so over and over again, the refuge is coming back here to ourselves. But there can be emotional relationship of great value, of warmth, of heartfeltness that comes in seeing it externally. And because we're human beings and we live in connectedness, we live in relationship to each other. And of course we're going to feel some kind of inspired feelings, everyone in a different way, if we feel and see around us in the world what we feel inside. And so for some people, it's just the abstract possibility of freedom is inspiring. But at some point as we practice, the idea is to begin to really recognize something that's here for us, in our experience. And then, taking our peace, taking our refuge we have, then it's possible to begin gazing upon the world in a new way. And gazing upon the world and seeing there's refuge in the world, seeing that there's much more goodness in the world than it's possible to see if we see the world through our hate or our greed or our fear and these kinds of things. Generally, for all the horrible things people do to each other, there are more people who are trying to make a difference. And I think the current protests we see that are so inspiring around the country is that they're responding to brutality, that it's horrific to see. But there are many, many more people who are coming forth to protest the brutality than are the people who are being brutal. To take refuge in all this goodness, all this courage, and all this, that there is refuge in the world. There is possibility to see the world in a new way. And this is not meant to be naive, but to find refuge in the world, whether it's in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, which are one of the great refuges, or is to start recognizing those qualities not only in oneself, but to recognize some of these qualities in the world around us. So the world itself becomes kind of a refuge because it has the qualities of what Buddhists would call qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. This is the possibility of what happens as we mature and develop in practice. And if we're able to see the refuges in the world, then even just seeing it begins to support that. It's kind of like food. Our seeing and recognizing and appreciating what's in the world, what's good in the world, is the fodder or food for what's the good in the world to grow as well. Not to deny the difficulties, but to hold them in I think, a valuable context. So I hope that for those of you who do have a strong, heartfelt connection to the external refuges, Buddha, Dharma, the Sangha, that you continue to do so, but you really remember that that external refuge is really not only pointing to ourselves inside, but also pointing that the inside and outside don't have to be so separated, so that there is a continuity, there is an oozing out, there is a intermingling of the inner refuge and the outer refuge. And that meeting and connection of the two, I would like for today to represent with the hands coming down and then bowing in refuge, out of refuge, with refuge, for the welfare and happiness of all beings. May we all discover our close, intimate, caring connection with each other and live in a world where we appreciate the mutual care and support that we can give each other. May all beings be free. May all beings know that they're cared for, respected, valued, and appreciated for their depth of their beauty and great value as human beings. Thank you.